Hey guys, Mitch with Shock Therapy, and today we're going to show you how to install the fully adjustable spring kit on the Polaris Ranger XP1000. This spring kit's going to do a couple different things for you guys. Not only is it fully adjustable, it is a much better quality spring, so it's not going to fade or sag like the factory ones do over time. This spring kit is also fully adjustable in the sense if you're carrying more weight, you can actually add preload to it to maintain your ride height. The most important part to this spring kit is making sure that after a couple hundred miles, you are rechecking the ride height, making sure that it is in that 13.5-inch mark front and rear. It's going to benefit your ride quality and it's going to help you maintain the ride height over time. All right guys, first thing we're going to do is jack the front of the car up until both tires are off the ground so we can remove both of the front shocks. All right, with both tires off the ground, we're gonna remove this side shock. This can be done with a 15mm socket and a 15mm wrench. Make sure you save the factory hardware. With the lower removed, we can remove the upper. All right, with both the factory nuts removed, we can now remove the bolt that holds the shock onto the car. Pull the lower one out, remove the upper one, and the shock comes out. Set that on the bench. With that one removed, we can repeat those steps on the other side and continue on. All right, with both front shocks removed, you can now remove the spring from the factory shock. You can use a spring compressor, you can rent one from AutoZone, either way. Go ahead and pull the factory spring off. Make sure that that bump stop moves down just a little bit to remove the spring retainer. Allows that to come right off. I'll do that to the other shock real quick. All right, so with both factory springs removed, we can now begin installing the adjustable preload collar onto the factory shock. What this is gonna do for you guys is actually be able to adjust the ride height with how much weight or how little weight you're carrying on the Ranger side of things. Actually pretty cool because it is fully adjustable. So before we actually install the adjustable preload collar onto the shock, there's a couple things that we need to do before this goes on. The first thing is notice that this collar is adjustable as well. We want this to be on the lowest setting. So this notch on the shock is going to be closest to the metal spring retainer. That is indicating that that is set on the lowest setting. We want to start there first before we add the collar onto it. When you are measuring this, what we're looking for a starting point for you guys is this silver ring on the black collar is about 1.25 inches from where the spring would sit on the collar to the bottom of this adjustable preload nut here. We're looking for 1.25 inches. Once you have that measurement set, make sure that you do it on the other side as well. Also, this measurement being on the lowest setting, we can now install the adjustable preload nut onto the shock. With that installed, we can then put it back into the spring compressor and begin installing the spring. When you are installing the spring, make sure that the logo and the number are facing right side up. When this shock is installed, this is the top, this is the bottom, so you want to be able to read that the logo is facing you in the right orientation. Install the spring. Go ahead and compress it. We also supply the new spring retainer in the kit. Make sure that this goes on before the factory retainer is reinstalled. Be careful to decompress everything. Once that's done, you now have a fully adjustable spring kit on the Ranger. Go ahead and repeat that on the other side. Once both springs are installed, we can now reinstall these back onto the vehicle. All right, so something to note before you guys install the shock back onto the vehicle here. If you look at the upper shock mount, there is 2 locations that this shock can be mounted in. With this spring kit, we are making sure that the shock gets mounted on the closest one to the middle of the car. Not the farthest one out, but the closest one in. That is important for clearance reasons, so make sure that you guys are mounting it in that location. The upper one installed, you can reinstall the lower. Make sure that you leave everything finger loose right now. We do have to check the ride height, so if you do have to remove the shock, we can remove the hardware easy. With that side installed, we can now reinstall the other side. Same thing on this side, make sure that the shock is mounting closest to the middle of the vehicle, not on the outside, and your adjustable preload nut is at the bottom, not at the top. Okay, with both fronts reinstalled, we can now lower the vehicle back on the ground and start removing the rear shocks. All right, we'll jack up the rear, start removing the rear shocks. You wanna make sure that both tires are off the ground so you can remove them easy. So we'll start with the top hardware. This is also a 15 wrench and a 15 socket. You can get to it from the back side of the vehicle here. Make sure that you save this hardware as it will be reused for the installation. The upper one loose, we'll loosen the lower. Now remove the bolts holding the shock on. This can be a little tricky to get out. If you move it forward, pull the lower out, it comes right out. Once you get that side out, we'll repeat the steps on the other side, remove the other shock. All right, with both rear shocks removed, we're gonna go ahead and remove the factory springs, just like the fronts. Go ahead and repeat that on the other shock. Both springs removed, you can set these back on the bench. Just like the fronts, we're gonna set our preload on the adjustable preload collar. We do have to remove this dust shield off of the shock so everything can fit. So we'll show you how we do that here and then we'll reinstall the spring kit. So these can be a little tricky to get off, but what we do here, just grab a razor blade. You can make 2 slits in this. Pull that back. And I work it around it a little bit and then pull it off. Go ahead and do that on the other shock. Okay, those removed. Just like the front, we're gonna go ahead and set our starting point on the adjustable preload system here. This measurement, we're gonna be setting at 1.5 inches from where the spring would sit on the billet, the adjustable part, to the bottom of the actual preload nut. So we're shooting for 1.5 inches. Okay, make sure you do that to both sides. With that done, we can now install the spring kit. Put the shock back in the spring compressor. And just like the front, this is going to be the bottom of the shock, so you want to make sure that the logo and all of that is facing the right direction. You want to be able to read it with the shock and the spring compressor. Make sure you install the new retainer that we supply with the spring kit. Reinstall the factory retainer. And repeat that on the other side. All right, so once both springs are reinstalled onto the shock, we can now put the shock back onto the vehicle. Just like the front, you want to make sure that the adjustable side of the spring system is on the bottom, the retainer is on the top. Now, another pro tip for you guys, the rear does have two mounting points as well. You have one on the outside of the frame and one on the inside of the frame. We are mounting the shock to the inside of the frame, so make sure that when this goes back on, it is going in that location. Reinstall the shock same way it came out. Make sure you get the bottom down in there first. And we'll install the upper hardware. And then reinstall lower. Make sure you put the nuts back on. Make sure that you do leave them loose as well for ride height later on. And go ahead and repeat that on the other side. Okay, with both shocks installed, we can lower the vehicle back on the ground and begin the ride height process. All right guys, with the vehicle back on the ground, we're gonna start the ride height process. This is pretty straightforward. What you want to do is drive the vehicle back and forth a couple of times just to settle the suspension. So we're going to go forward with it. Hit the brakes a little bit. We'll back it up. Again, hit the brakes a little bit. Now when you come forward, make sure that the vehicle comes to a coasting stop. You do not want to hit the brakes. Let it settle on its own. Put it back in park, and then we'll have somebody measure it while you stay in the vehicle. All right guys, with the driver in the vehicle, we're gonna go ahead and measure our front measurement. Ride height wise, this measurement is taken from the lower control arm to where the lower control arm goes into the frame. That measurement, we are looking for 13.5 inches as a starting point. All right, so 13.5 inches in the front. Now we're gonna measure the rear and see where we're at. All right, so we'll measure the rear. Our measuring point is basically where the bottom of the frame to where the lower control arm goes into the frame. We're going to be looking for 13.5 inches at that mark as well. All right guys, we are 13.5. We are sitting level at our mark. If you guys do the ride heights and you do not achieve those numbers on the first try, this adjustable preload system is what you're gonna go after to get to that ride height number. Basically, if you add preload to the system, it's gonna raise the rear of the car and the front. If you take preload out of the system, if you lower this, it's gonna lower the car. So your adjustability is in this preload system to get you to 13.5 in the front and 13.5 in the rear. All right guys, with ride heights all set, we're gonna jack up the rear of the vehicle, tighten everything down, making sure that we're torquing everything as well. Make sure that you jack it up until the tires are off the ground again, just to make tightening down everything easier. Once you have everything tightened down, we'll make sure that we torque all of the hardware to 55 foot-pounds. All right, with the rear all tightened and torqued, we can drop it back on the ground and move to the front and do the same thing. Tighten down, we'll make sure that we are torquing these ones to 55 foot-pounds as well. All right, with everything tightened and torqued, you can lower the vehicle back onto the ground, and your installation is complete.